What if one of the saddest voices in music wasn't performing sadness at all? For decades, Roy Orbison stood apart from almost every star of his era. While other performers chased attention, he seemed to avoid it. While others built careers on image and charisma, he hid behind dark sunglasses and let the music speak for itself. To millions of fans, he was simply the man who sang Heartbreak better than anyone else. But there was something unusual about Roy Orbison. The pain in his voice sounded too real. The loneliness felt too convincing. And the tragedies that followed him throughout life seemed almost impossible to believe. Looking back, many people asked the same question. How could one man endure so much loss and still keep standing? The answer isn't found in the headlines. It isn't found in the record sales. And it isn't found in the legend that formed around him after his death. The truth is hidden inside a life filled with devastating losses, quiet resilience, and a mystery that was never really a mystery at all. Because the greatest secret of Roy Orbison wasn't what happened to him. It was how he survived it. Long before he became one of the most recognizable voices in music history, Roy Orbison was a shy boy growing up in Texas during the Great Depression. Nothing about his childhood suggested future superstardom. He wasn't the confident kid who commanded attention in a room. He wasn't the handsome rebel who naturally attracted crowds. In fact, many people remembered him as quiet, awkward, and deeply self-conscious. His thick glasses made him stand out. His reserved personality often kept him isolated. In many ways, Roy spent much of his youth feeling like an outsider. But loneliness has a strange way of shaping people. For some, it becomes a weakness. For others, it becomes fuel. For Roy Orbison, it became music. The guitar his father gave him as a child opened a door to a different world. While other children sought acceptance from classmates, Roy found comfort in melodies and lyrics. Music became the place where he could express emotions that were difficult to explain. As the years passed, something unusual happened. The shy boy developed a voice unlike anything listeners had ever heard. It wasn't rough. It wasn't traditionally powerful. Instead, it carried vulnerability. There was sadness in it, longing, heartbreak. Even before he had experienced much of life's suffering, Roy somehow sounded as if he already understood it. When he entered the music business during the 1950s, executives struggled to categorize him. The industry rewarded image as much as talent. Roy didn't fit the formula. He wasn't another Elvis Presley. He wasn't another flashy rock and roll performer. Some executives doubted audiences would ever connect with someone so different. Yet listeners did connect. Perhaps because he sounded authentic. Perhaps because people recognized something real behind the voice. Or perhaps because even then, Roy Orbison was revealing pieces of himself through music. What nobody knew was that the loneliness shaping his songs would eventually be matched by real-life tragedies far beyond anything he could imagine. And soon, someone would enter his life who seemed destined to change everything. As Roy Orbison's career slowly gained momentum, another important chapter was beginning. Her name was Claudette Frady. When Roy met her, he was immediately captivated. Friends would later describe their connection as intense and emotional from the very beginning. To Roy, Claudette represented more than romance. She represented belonging. For someone who had spent much of his life feeling different from everyone around him, that mattered enormously. The couple married in 1957. As Roy's career expanded, Claudette became the emotional center of his world. Success arrived steadily. Hit records followed. Crowds grew larger. But behind the scenes, the pressures of fame were beginning to create cracks. Life on the road demanded constant travel. Long separations became normal. The music industry rewarded ambition but often punished stability. Like many celebrity marriages, their relationship faced challenges that outsiders rarely saw. Reports later revealed periods of tension and heartbreak. At one point, Roy learned of Claudette's involvement with another man. The discovery devastated him. For many people, such a betrayal would have ended the marriage. But Roy's attachment to Claudette ran deeper than simple pride. Despite the pain, he chose reconciliation. The decision revealed something important about his psychology. Roy wasn't driven by ego. He was driven by connection. The fear of losing the people he loved often outweighed his own hurt. Eventually, the couple began repairing their relationship. The future once again appeared hopeful. Friends noticed positive changes. The marriage seemed stronger. The difficult chapter appeared to be ending. Then, without warning, fate intervened. On a quiet Tennessee road, an ordinary afternoon turned into a disaster that would permanently alter Roy Orbison's life. And the heartbreak waiting ahead was only the beginning. June 6, 1966. It began as an ordinary day. There were no warnings, no signs, no indication that Roy Orbison's life was about to split into two parts, before and after. Claudette was riding a motorcycle near Nashville when a truck unexpectedly pulled into her path. The collision was catastrophic. She died from her injuries at just 25 years old. The news struck Roy with overwhelming force. People close to him later described a man completely shattered by grief. For years, Claudette had been the center of his emotional universe. Now she was gone. What made the loss especially cruel was its timing. The couple had recently worked through one of the most difficult periods of their marriage. After betrayal, forgiveness had followed. After conflict, reconciliation had emerged. There was a growing sense that they had found their way back to each other. Then everything vanished in an instant. Psychologists often describe sudden loss as uniquely devastating because it offers no preparation. There is no gradual adjustment, no opportunity for goodbye, only shock, only absence. Roy seemed trapped inside that absence. Yet despite the devastation, he continued performing. Night after night, he stepped on stages and sang songs about heartbreak while carrying a level of grief few audience members could truly comprehend. Listeners noticed something different. The sadness in his voice now felt deeper. The vulnerability sounded more genuine. Songs that once seemed emotional suddenly felt painfully real. But there was another layer to the tragedy. Music wasn't merely helping Roy cope. It was also forcing him to revisit the emotions repeatedly. Every performance became a reminder. Every lyric carried memories. Every applause-filled evening ended with the same reality waiting backstage. Claudette wasn't coming home. Many assumed this would be the darkest chapter of Roy Orbison's life. They were wrong. An even greater tragedy was approaching. And when it arrived, it would leave the entire world questioning how much heartbreak one human being could endure. If the death of Claudette Orbison had left Roy wounded, what happened next nearly destroyed him. 2 years after losing his wife, Roy was trying to do what he had always done: keep moving forward. It wasn't easy. Friends described a man who carried sadness with him everywhere. The grief never seemed to leave. Instead, it became part of him. Still, he continued recording music, touring, and raising his children. From the outside, it looked as if life was slowly finding balance again. But on September 14, 1968, disaster struck once more. Roy was touring in England when an urgent message arrived from Tennessee. His home had caught fire. At first, details were unclear. There was confusion, hope, desperate attempts to understand what had happened. Then the truth emerged. 2 of his sons, Roy Jr.'s younger brothers, Anthony and Roy Dwayne, had been trapped inside. Neither survived. The news was almost impossible to comprehend. One tragedy can change a life. 2 tragedies of this magnitude can change a person. Those who knew Roy struggled to describe his reaction. Some said he became eerily quiet. Others remembered a man who looked completely drained, as though a part of him had simply shut down. The psychological impact was enormous. Researchers often note that repeated traumatic losses can alter how a person views the world. Trust in the future begins to disappear. Hope becomes fragile. The belief that good things will last starts to fade. Roy now carried the loss of a wife and 2 children. And yet, somehow, he remained standing. The mystery wasn't why he sang sad songs anymore. The mystery was how he managed to keep singing at all. Many people would have disappeared from public life. Many would have given up. Roy didn't. But survival is not the same as healing. Behind every performance was a man carrying memories that could never be erased. And as the 1970s approached, another battle was quietly beginning. This time, it wasn't against grief. It was against becoming forgotten. What happens when a man loses almost everything, and then starts losing his place in the world as well? By the early 1970s, the music industry looked very different from the one Roy Orbison had conquered a decade earlier. The British invasion had changed popular music. Rock was evolving. New stars were emerging. New sounds dominated radio stations. Suddenly, Roy Orbison found himself in unfamiliar territory. He was still respected, still admired, but no longer at the center of the conversation. For artists, there is a unique kind of pain in becoming invisible. Success creates attention. Attention creates purpose. When that attention fades, many performers begin questioning who they are without it. For Roy, the challenge was especially cruel. He wasn't just facing a professional decline. He was facing it while carrying unimaginable personal grief. Record sales slowed. Chart success became less frequent. The spotlight moved elsewhere. Yet something interesting happened beneath the surface. While mainstream audiences focused on newer stars, musicians never stopped paying attention to Roy Orbison. Songwriters studied his emotional honesty. Singers admired his extraordinary vocal range. Industry insiders continued speaking about him with almost reverent respect. It created a strange contradiction. The public seemed to be forgetting him. The musicians shaping the future of music were not. In some ways, Roy became a musician's musician, a legend hiding in plain sight. Years passed. The hits became memories. The headlines became less frequent. Many assumed his greatest days were behind him. But history has a habit of surprising people, especially when genuine talent is involved. Unknown to Roy, a younger generation of artists had grown up listening to his music. They hadn't forgotten him. In fact, they were preparing to bring him back into the spotlight. And what happened next would become one of the most remarkable comebacks in music history. But after everything Roy had endured, could success still heal anything? Or were some wounds simply too deep? The 1980s arrived with something Roy Orbison hadn't experienced in years. Momentum. Slowly at first, then all at once, interest in his music began growing again. Younger artists openly praised him. Fans rediscovered classic recordings. Film soundtracks introduced his songs to new audiences. For the first time in years, Roy wasn't being remembered as a relic of the past. He was becoming relevant again. Perhaps the most important sign of this revival came from fellow musicians. Some of the biggest names in music openly admitted their admiration for him. To them, Roy Orbison wasn't merely another singer. He was one of the greatest voices ever recorded. Then came an extraordinary opportunity. Roy joined the Traveling Wilburys alongside George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne. The group brought together some of the most respected musicians in the world. And remarkably, Roy fit perfectly among them. The collaboration exposed him to millions of listeners who may never have explored his earlier work. Suddenly, the man who had spent years on the sidelines was back at the center of attention. Observers noticed a change. The sadness remained. It always would. But there was also confidence. Renewed energy. A sense of possibility. For perhaps the first time since the tragedies of the 1960s, life seemed to be offering Roy something positive. New projects were underway. New audiences were discovering him. A new chapter appeared ready to begin. Many believed he had finally reached a place of peace. Yet grief is complicated. It doesn't disappear simply because circumstances improve. The past remains present. The scars remain visible. And fate, which had already altered Roy's life so many times before, wasn't finished yet. Just as the future began opening up before him, everything changed again. This time, there would be no comeback. December 6, 1988. Roy Orbison was at his mother's home in Tennessee. By all appearances, life was moving in a positive direction. His career revival was gaining momentum. His future looked brighter than it had in decades. Then suddenly, without warning, he suffered a fatal heart attack. He was only 52 years old. The news stunned the music world. Fans struggled to understand it. Friends struggled to accept it. After everything he had survived, the ending felt almost impossible. There were new albums planned, new performances ahead, new opportunities waiting. Instead, the story stopped. In the days that followed, tributes poured in from around the world. Musicians spoke about his voice with awe. Fans revisited songs that had soundtracked some of the most emotional moments of their lives. And a question continued to surface. Why did Roy Orbison's story feel so different? Part of the answer lay in the tragedies. Part of it lay in the music. But there was something deeper. Roy represented resilience in its purest form. Again and again, life delivered devastating blows. Again and again, he found a way to continue. Not perfectly, not without pain, but he continued. That persistence became part of his legacy. The mystery wasn't whether he suffered. The evidence was obvious. The mystery was how he transformed suffering into something meaningful. How did someone carrying so much grief continue creating beauty? And perhaps more importantly, what does that reveal about the man behind the legend? The answer lies in the final truth of Roy Orbison's life. A truth that changes how every one of his songs is heard. For years, people searched for some hidden explanation behind Roy Orbison. A secret, a scandal, a shocking revelation. Something that would explain the haunting sadness woven throughout his music. But after decades of interviews, biographies, and historical records, the truth turned out to be far simpler and far more heartbreaking. There was no great mystery. There was only loss. Roy Orbison wasn't pretending to understand heartbreak. He understood it intimately. His wife died suddenly. 2 of his children were taken in a house fire. His career rose, fell, and rose again. Through every stage of that journey, he carried wounds that never completely healed. Yet what makes his story remarkable isn't the suffering. It's what he chose to do with it. Many people become consumed by grief. Roy transformed it into art. Every note carried authenticity. Every lyric reflected emotions he genuinely understood. Listeners connected with him because they could hear something real. Not performance. Not acting. Truth. Perhaps that is why his music continues to resonate decades after his death. People aren't just hearing songs. They're hearing survival. They're hearing a man confronting loneliness, heartbreak, regret, and hope all at once. The sunglasses became part of the legend. The voice became immortal. But beneath both was a human being who endured more than most people could imagine. And maybe that is the mystery finally solved. Roy Orbison's greatest secret wasn't hidden from the world. It was hidden in plain sight. Every time he stepped onto a stage, every time he sang about heartbreak, every time his voice cracked with emotion, he was telling the truth. Not about a character, not about a fictional story, about himself. And once that truth becomes clear, his music sounds different forever. Because the saddest voice in music history wasn't performing pain. He was living through it.